Alfred, can you tell me a little bit about what life was like for you growing up and some of the teachings that you experienced while you were growing up?
Well, I grew up in Wabasca. From about the age of 4, we lived in Wabasca. Sometimes for the summer, my dad going to work in Athabasca and Slave Lake. But then for the winter, we'd go back to Wabasca. But even at that age, at the age of 4, in the winter, and I would say 48, 49, in the winter of 48, 49, we had gone to Athabasca. My dad was working there. But when we lived in Wabasca, moving back to Wabasca from Athabasca, we lived in Wabasca, and my dad was a very good carpenter in the old style. He was very good. He was a great log house builder also. He knew how to build log cabins, log houses. And he built a house in Wabasca, a 2-story house. And that house was about 40 by 50, big house for that period in time. And for that location, it was a big house. And we had a little farm, started a little bit of farming, raising vegetables, potatoes, and later on planting wheat to a small extent. But not far from where my dad built that house, there was an old couple that lived there maybe 200, 300 yards from there, from our house. And that old couple the man was my mother's uncle. My maternal grandmother's brother was Ambrose Larocque Bruley. And he was a very well-known elder. Not an overnight elder. He learned and earned his knowledge from previous elders, old people. I'll use the term old people, speaking of elders, because nowadays people that study in books or computers, they get their knowledge there and all of a sudden they're elders. And these old people that I learned from, including Bruce Larocque Broley, he's the one that I started learning from. I used to go and visit my grandparents. His wife, Celestine Bruley, was also knowledgeable in medicines, traditional medicines. But my grandfather, Ambrose Larocque Bruley, was knowledgeable in the ceremonies and traditions. And he's the one that I started with. Like I said, I used to go and visit them. And he'd tell me stories, and so did my grandmother, Celestine. And from the stories they told, I had to find the meaning of those stories. Every story that they told, there was a meaning to it. Like one, what is the moral of the story? What is the in the Bible it says Jesus told them parables. Now that the apostles and disciples had to decipher the meaning of that story, and that's how we need And Bruce Larocque Bruley and his wife Celestine, my grandmother, would tell those stories. They would not directly tell me what it meant. But the protocol was that every time I went to visit my dad, and so did my brother, my dad would give us a little pinch of tobacco. And by that time, those old people were using pipes, not cigarettes, just little store-bought pipes. And we had to fill the bowl with tobacco for the grandmother and for the grandfather. And then, at first, when they would start telling us stories, we would interrupt. And then they would just shut down, just sit there and not say anything. Finally asking what it was they were waiting for. And the answer would be, well, since you finished that story for me, you know what that story is. So I don't have to tell you, because you know ahead of time what I'm going to say. And that was a teaching in not to interrupt a person, especially an elder if they're telling a story or teaching. There will come a time when they will ask, they will say, do you have anything to ask, or do you have any questions, or is there anything you want to know? Is there something you want to know from that story? But to interrupt is a sign that I knew what you were going to say. So from there I learned not to interrupt people when they're talking, because I don't know what they're going to say. And I experienced that now, more so now. And also, if I'm not being spoken to, not to cut in between two people that are talking, or more than two people, not to just go in and put my 2 cents in. I have to ask their permission, not always, but ask their permission. If I'm not included in that conversation, then I have no right to butt in. I have to listen, because it doesn't concern me. And I don't have to listen also. Since it does not concern me, I don't have to listen. So I have no right to butt in. I have no right to interrupt. But I experienced that so many times. And these storytelling sessions went anywhere from late afternoon or early evening to late at night. And just to sit there and listen. Sometimes the grandmother would provide soup for the evening, and she in turn would tell us stories. And the same thing with her. She would give a time when it was for us to ask. And the same thing with other old people, elders as we call them now. There were people like Noel Buscayu, a grandfather, my father's uncle, and his wife. We only knew him as Chivichis. Grandfather Noel was about 6'4", 6'3", even in his 80s, and his wife was maybe about 4'11". But she bossed that big man around. But the same thing with him and Chivichis. We had to do the same thing. Fill in, my dad would give us tobacco again and fill the pipe bowl for both. And there were 2 uncles, their sons, little Paul and their older son Peter, that lived with them until very old, until they passed away. But those uncles were very knowledgeable too. Peter's Cree name was âcimostakewin, which means in Cree, it means one you go to for defense, the defender, so to speak. His Cree name was the âcimostakewin. The one I go to be, so he can defend me. So in those days when the name was given, it had a meaning. What was expected of that child as he grew up into manhood or into an adult as a woman. And the other grandfather was Ribbon Leg, Sinbangat, and his wife his wife's name was Janet, but Indian people called her Sanit, because then the English names at that time were not, didn't sound right for the people. Like if a woman was named Mary, Indian people would call her Millie. Or if a man's name was Julian, the Cree translation, the Cree would call him Sulia, and Noel would be Nuil, and Johnny would be Chani. So it was not an English pronunciation of names, but you knew who the person was talking about. And Cyprian, a cousin of mine, he passed on, Cyprian would be Siblil. Mary Rose would be Billy Loose. And Mary Margaret would be Billy Mugglet. Those were the Cree pronunciations for the old people in those days, the names. And Celestine Broley, my grandmother, the way we knew her by was Celestine. And Justine, an uncle of mine, a son of Brutal Rock, his name would be pronounced True Stone. But these were people that we had to go to if we wanted to know something. And in that time, it was just to hear the stories that he told. I didn't know at that time. I'll speak only for myself, not my brother, even though he accompanied me many times to go and hear the stories. At that time, I was just there to listen to the stories, to the legends that these old people talked about, or these old people told. And the other was Wanchipskow. That woman, the Wanchipskow Jr., there was another woman by that name earlier, the Dark Knight, Wanchipskow. And not K-N-A-G-H-T, but Knight, and the Dark Knight. That was her Cree name, Wanchipskow. And she was well known for knowing the traditional medicines, and she knew them. And how we got the opportunity to talk to these old people, or I got the opportunity to learn from these old people, was in the summer, Noah Busquio and his wife Chibichis and their two sons, Peter and Paul, and old Sin Bangat Rubin Leg and his wife Janet Sanit, Stigat, his wooden leg from Sandy Lake. When they came to Wabasca, they would come to our house, and not every time, because they had relatives there close by, and they would go and set up their teepees and their tents. And anyway, when they came to our house, they would ask my dad if they could camp there, set up their teepee and their tent. Johnny Gambler, St. Bangad, Ribbonleg, that was his name, and his wife Janet, Sanit. And of course, my dad would allow them to set up camp there. And then he gave me the opportunity to go and visit them the second night they were there, to go and sometimes the first night I'd go and visit them and learn the stories with my little pinch of tobacco, fill the old lady's pipe and the old man's pipe and just listen there. And then the stories would start. Not right away. Would sit there for a few minutes and then the stories would come. The stories about the black bear. I told you yesterday it started. And the stories about âcimostakewin. And I learned long ago, in those days with St. Vanguard, Johnny Gambler, Ribbonleg, that âcimostakewin, a false spirit that could turn himself into any animal, any bird, even a fish. And every living thing, every living being was his younger sibling. All the animals were his younger siblings. There was only one that was older than him, than âcimostakewin, and that was the sun. But the sun also honored the Creator. And so, being the third in line, the Creator and the sun and âcimostakewin. And so we learned from the stories, the legends of âcimostakewin, the false spirit, the imitator, the chameleon, a being that can change or take any form, whether a tree, a bird, an animal, a fish. And there are stories, many stories I remember of âcimostakewin, but in those also they have a meaning, the same as the black bear. And I don't know if I told you that little tradition of getting a black bear in the winter, where it's not just, you don't hunt black bears or brown bears in the winter because they hibernate. But if a man, a hunter, finds a breathing hole of a black bear or a brown bear, they don't just dig that den or that covering, which is more generally made of branches, leaves, grass that covered the bear, and then the snow covers all those. And there's a little breathing hole to allow the bear to breathe. And if a man or a hunter finds that in the winter, or a trapper, that person doesn't just shoot or dig out the animal. The tradition that they give something, an offering, or an acknowledgement, because they believe in the tradition of beliefs is that when that man or that hunter finds that breathing hole, that bear has willed it to the man to be found. That bear has sacrificed itself, has donated itself to the man and his family, or to the hunter and and to the hunter's family. The belief is that that hunter may be having a hard time, his or her family may be having a hard time through the winter. So that bear, having that spiritual knowledge, sacrifices itself so the family may live. And in acknowledging that sacrifice, the hunter has to give something that he or she values in return for that sacrifice. Not a payment, but to acknowledge the sacrifice made by that bear. And that's one of the reasons why the bears are very held in high esteem by the Aboriginal people. And they can be used, several parts of the bear can be used for medicines. And to acquire that knowledge, a person has to know how to treat that bear and the medicinal parts of that bear. Like, there's a story that goes with the respect for the bear and how it relates to the Aboriginal people. It's been told in Wabasca, I don't know how many people know that story, but my mother used to tell us that story, and so did my grandfather Ambrose Larocque, and so did Noel Busquer from Sandy Lake, when he used to come and camp in our front yard. And he would tell that story also, not every time, but I still, to the point where I still remember the exact stages of that story, where a young boy grew up in his grandmother's lodge. The lodge, the vision was given to him, to that little boy, that it was a grandmother that adopted him. And there's a beginning to that story. There's a beginning to that story regarding the black bear, the Aboriginal people, Indian people. I will call Aboriginal people the Cree, the Woodland Cree, Nihiawak. Nihio in Woodland Cree has learned from old ribbon leg, Sinbangat, English name Johnny Gambler. He used to say Muya Nihio. It's not pronounced Nihio. It's pronounced Nihio. Part of my body, a part of my being. Nihio. Nihio. Oh, this one is a part of me, part of my body, a part of my being. But if I say Munyo, not a part of me, that refers to none. Nihio, none, a person not a part of me. Totally different origin, but still a part of humanity. And the story relating to the black bear, the brown bear, because there are some black bears, there are some cinnamon bears. And anyway, let's go back to that story about the boy and the mother bear. One day they're in an Indian camp in a bunch of lodges, teepees, whatever, tents, lodges anyway. an Indian camp, Nihio camp. And there was a young woman there who had a little boy. And her husband got killed by a grizzly in a hunt. A grizzly killed that man, that Indian man. And nobody knew about that man being killed by the grizzly until a few days later, when other hunters went looking for him and they found him all mutilated, and you could see the markings of the grizzly. And so in time, the wife of that man that was killed by the grizzly, in time that woman met another young man. But that young man did not like the baby boy that the woman had before they met, before his wife, before her husband got killed. That woman had a baby with that other man. So in the summer, the following summer, and towards autumn, several women went berry picking blueberries. And that young woman with the baby boy went with those women to pick berries. And she took her baby boy, who was now by a little over 1 year old. And knowing that her present man, that new man that she had, did not like her son, and that her new husband wanted to get rid of that baby boy. So, and when they were picking berries, that gave her an opportunity to get rid of that boy. So she made a sling, a whipson, a sling between two trees, and she made a little cradle in a swing to put that baby boy in. And she put him to sleep. And after he was asleep, then she went and joined the other women that were picking berries, but this was a little way from where she made that swing for her boy. Because she wanted to be with that man rather than be with her son, rather than keep her son. So she gave up that baby boy to be with that man in their camp. That's why she went and joined those women. Eventually, those women moved away from her. As they were picking berries, they got farther away. And towards early evening, they went back to their camp, and one of the women asked that young woman, where's your baby? And that woman said, I don't know. I just left him there for a little bit and he was gone. I went looking for him and he was gone. I think somebody took it. Somebody took my boy or some animal. The truth was that that woman left her boy there. And and at nighttime, the boy started crying because he was scared and cried all night. And next morning, a black bear came along and heard the baby boy crying. So she went to investigate. She went to check where that crying came from, and she saw the swing, and she saw the little boy in that swing. And she went and checked where the women had been picking berries. She couldn't find anyone, but she knew there was a camp nearby of a village of Indian people, Nihio. But she knew that boy was unwanted, was not wanted by his mother. She would rather be with that other man that new husband. So she sacrificed her boy to be with that man. Anyway, as time went on, the black bear took that baby boy and carried him on her back. And they went, and she found a cave. And that winter, that's where she spent the winter with that baby boy. And then at the age of about 3, that baby boy started remembering, knowing what was going on. And then he started telling a story. When my grandmother, when Nohum picked me up when I was crying at night, she carried me on her back all through that fall. We went around picking berries, and when we found a berry patch, she would pick the berries and put them up her sleeve. It's like that. A visionary, a vision that was given to him by the black bear, to see that that black bear was a grandmother, not a bear, a grandmother. And her arms, the black bear's arms, were sleeves, not fur, not hair. And the bears that she was stuffing in her sleeves were for the coming winter. Kanima, no, we will store this food for the winter, so we will have something to eat during the winter, because I will be sleeping, but you will not be sleeping all winter, so I have to get some food for you for the winter, and also for me, because I won't be eating during the winter. And all the food that we gather, we will put in our lodge. And when we are there, you will be the only one that comes out during the winter. But I will not be coming out. And after the snow leaves, then we will go fishing. When the fish are running in the streams, we will go fishing. And then we will be picking the roots and medicines for the coming summer and the winter. And when the berries are ripe, then we'll go picking berries, raspberries, strawberries, raspberries, ayuskanak, raspberries, sapumnak, there's a name for them, sapumnak, Saskatoon, Saskatoon, Inimna, blueberries, Tagoimnada, choke cherries, Skitsugumna, the berries resembling the eye. There's two forms. Some are big, some are smaller. There's two types of those berries. Skitsugumna, they're called. We will be picking them all through the summer. And you will not hunt. You are too small yet. But you will help me fishing. And we will prepare for the winter. So at the end of the summer, they finished picking the berries and storing the fish with his grandmother. He is still living in a vision given to him by the bear, who is the grandmother. And this went on several years, and then the following summer, when he was 5, they were going seeking shelter. And there was one place that looked good. The boy now said that place looked good, but the grandmother said, no, not this one, because someone will be passing by here, and we cannot live here. Someone will be passing by here during the winter, and he will find us. So we moved to another place, and we found a new place, a good place. And my grandmother said, this will be good. No one will pass here after trying 3 times, finding a place here not good, because somebody will find this place. Then the 4th one we came to, my grandmother said, yes, this will be good. This will be where we will set up our shelter for the winter. You will be the only one going out, because for me, I will be sleeping throughout the winter. And the boy asked the grandmother, why do you sleep all winter? Because grandmother bears are tired from all the gathering, from all the preparing of the gathering of the berries, the gathering of the food, the picking, the gathering of the medicines to pass on to people like you. So from there, all summer of working, we got tired, so grandmother bears sleeps through the winter. And the helper is the only one that will go out. So you become the helper. Scapios or the elder. And this went on through several years, always preparing for the following season. And then when the boy was in early manhood, I'd say about 14, 15, by now he knows the medicines. He knows a lot of medicines. He knows a lot of how to mix the berries with food, like fish or meat. Because we mix berries when we live in the bush in the woodlands. We'll mix berries with meat and even with fish. And a lot of people nowadays, a lot of urban Indians, Nihiwak, Utinau Nihiwak, do not know that even the liver of a mariah, burbot, some call them burbot, some call them mariah, some call it lin, just like a catfish. But the liver of that fish is beyond compare when it's fried. There's nothing like it that can come close to comparing itself to that liver when it's fried. So that's one. The fish eggs, mixing fish eggs with bannock. And that was taught by that grandmother bear to that young man. Then when he was about 14, 15, they found a place in late fall. They found a place where they were going to build their shelter. So they did. But before they moved into their shelter, the grandmother said, "This will be the place we will live." And she said, "I will live for part of the winter. But sometime after the turn of the season, a man will come and he will find us. And I will supply the food for that man and his family and that village. And when that day comes, you must not do anything to that man. You must not retaliate, because when I give the sacrifice, then you will know for the first time, you will see what and who I am. I am your grandmother. But for the first time, you will see what I am. And this is why in the future, in generations to come, that your knowledge of the gathering of the berries, the food, and the medicines, and what the medicines are used for, the different roots, the different plants, you will pass on to your children, and they will pass on your knowledge to their children, your grandchildren. And from there on, our people will know what to use for medicine, what to use for what kind of sickness, what kind of hurt, what plants to use, what herbs, and what kind of animals they can eat, what kind of fish they can eat. And they will also learn how to translate a dream. We'll know, but you will not give the translation of that dream to that person. That right after they finish talking to you, you must wait 4 days. You must sleep for four nights. And if the Creator answers your prayers, you will have the answer in 4 days, and you will give that person the meaning of that dream. Those I have given you, and those you must remember the ability. You do not learn from paper or from a machine, because it will not be true. But you must remember the teachings of the grandmother who is a bear, grandmother bear. And when that time comes, that man will find us, he must not do anything to retaliate. After I'm gone, you must come out of our lodge, and that man will see you, and he will go back to their village and tell the villagers the sacrifice I have made, that there is food now, because those people will be hungry. So the time came on that day when that man came along in cold winter, in deep snow. That man came along, and in the opening of their shelter, that young boy saw a stick being poked in. And grandmother said, "Ogestaw hindi ko, give me a gift. Ogestaw hin. And the knowledge I will give you will be given to you by my grandson, who I have taught. And when he goes back to your village with you, he will pass on that knowledge to you and to the people. But you must give me something first before I give my sacrifice. So the young man, the man went back to their village and brought back a gift which he valued, he and the family valued. And next morning, put that gift at the entrance of the shelter. And the grandmother took it. And when my grandmother took that gift, and with that, she passed on, she died. And then I went out. And there was that man that my mother had given me up to be with, that man. That was the man that found us. But my grandmother made the ultimate sacrifice, because when we went back to the village of my stepfather, so to speak, those villagers were starving, were very hungry. But as my grandmother had said, before I enter my mother's lodge, they must put on the floor red cloth, preferably red velvet, on the floor, and where I'm going to sit across the fire, across from the opening, there's a fire there in the center, and across there I will sit, and there must be a red velvet there with turquoise, black, white, and red ribbons. And only then can I enter my mother's lodge. And from there I will start teaching the people what my grandmother had taught me throughout the years. My grandmother gave the ultimate sacrifice, but I will not retaliate. To show you that, and my mother, that even though she gave me up to be with you, my grandmother was strong enough to give the ultimate sacrifice. And from there on, and from here on now, the black bear, the bear, Musqua, will be a symbol of medicine, will be a symbol of strength, knowledge, kindness, respect, trust, love. So that's a story that began many, many decades, maybe centuries ago. But that young man is now getting old. And that story will continue. Why we respect the black bear. What is our connection to the black bear? What do we learn from the black bear?